The night was silent, too silent. Evelyn froze as Rusty began growling at the old cabin floor. Then, a faint knock, like something alive beneath the wood. She knelt down, trembling, brushing away the dust, and found a loose board. Inside, a hidden box wrapped in velvet, and a single key marked Silver River. Evelyn whispered, "Father, what did you hide from me?" Before it gets started, please take a few seconds to hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Chapter 1. The Road to Silver River. The sky hung low and gray, pressing against the city like a tired sigh. Rain slicked the streets in ribbons of silver as Evelyn Brooks waited at the bus terminal, her hands gripping a worn leather bag that held everything she owned. She was 49, slender but sturdy, with the kind of strength that came from years of working with her hands. Her auburn hair was streaked with silver, tied back in a loose braid, and her face carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who had forgotten what rest felt like. She wore a faded denim jacket and the same pair of work boots she'd owned for 10 years, both scarred, both loyal. 2 weeks ago, the textile factory where she had worked for over 2 decades had closed its doors. The foreman, a kind man with trembling hands, had told her he was sorry, but sorrow didn't pay rent. It was Noah, her 13-year-old son, who convinced her to leave the city. He stood beside her now, a lanky boy with eyes too old for his age. His dark curls clung to his forehead from the rain, and his fingers toyed nervously with the leash of their dog, Rusty. Rusty was a 7-year-old German shepherd, massive but gentle, his fur the color of burnt caramel with streaks of gray at the muzzle. His amber eyes seemed to understand more than words ever could. He had been her late husband's dog, a loyal sentinel through grief and silence, and sometimes Evelyn felt as though the animal carried a piece of her husband's spirit inside him. When the bus arrived, its brakes hissing like a tired dragon, Evelyn hesitated before stepping on. The letter from the law firm in her pocket felt like a riddle she hadn't solved yet. A house she had never seen, left to her by a father she had never known. The address was in a town called Silver River, the kind of name that sounded more like a promise than a place. The bus rumbled through the city, past empty storefronts and shuttered diners, until the buildings gave way to open land. Fields stretched wide under the pewter sky, dotted with barns that leaned like weary travelers. Evelyn stared out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. She thought of her mother, a stern woman who never spoke of the man who'd left before Evelyn was born. "He wasn't worth your time," her mother had said once, folding laundry with mechanical precision. But now that he was gone, he had left her something. Why? Guilt, love, or maybe just obligation? The rhythm of the road lulled Noah to sleep, his head resting against Rusty's shoulder. The dog's ears twitched at every sound, his gaze fixed forward, alert and ready. Evelyn envied that steadiness. She wished she could face life the way Rusty faced the road, loyal to the present, unburdened by questions. Hours later, the bus dropped them at a crossroads surrounded by pine forest. The driver, a gruff man with a gray beard and kind eyes, nodded toward the dirt path that vanished into the trees. "Silver River's that way," he said. "House should be past the bridge, near the bend." Evelyn thanked him and adjusted the strap on her bag. The road ahead was narrow and winding, the scent of rain-soaked earth thick in the air. Rusty trotted ahead, tail swaying like a metronome. Noah walked beside her, quiet, his gaze darting between the trees. "Do you think it'll look like the pictures you see in magazines?" he asked. "A cabin by the water, maybe with a porch?" "Maybe," Evelyn said, though she doubted it. Nothing in her life had ever looked like the pictures in magazines. After nearly an hour of walking, they reached it, a clearing by a broad, slow-moving river. The water reflected the gray sky like tarnished glass. And there, half hidden behind tall birch trees, stood the house. It leaned slightly to one side, its roof sagging, but it was still standing. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving bare wood silvered by weather. A crooked chimney rose from the roof like a stubborn memory. Evelyn stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, she said nothing. Noah's voice broke the silence. "Is this really ours?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "Seems so." She approached the front steps, each one groaning under her weight. Rusty sniffed the air, his ears pricking up. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and dust, but not decay. It was the kind of smell that spoke of years left untouched, not neglect. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls like shedding skin. On a small table near the window lay a framed photograph turned face down. Evelyn lifted it. The glass was cracked, but she could still make out a man with sharp features and light eyes. The same eyes she saw in her own mirror. Her breath caught. On the mantel above the cold fireplace sat a stack of yellowed papers tied with twine, and next to them, a single velvet pouch. Evelyn untied the pouch and found a small, ornate key inside. Its metal was warm, as if it had been waiting for her. "Mom," Noah whispered, "someone's been here." Evelyn turned. Rusty stood by the doorway, his fur bristling, a low growl rising in his throat. Outside, the wind had shifted, soft at first, then sharp, like the breath of something unseen. Somewhere beyond the trees came the crunch of footsteps, not animal, human. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She reached for Noah, her voice a whisper. "Stay close." Rusty's growl deepened. The sound outside stopped, replaced by the faint creak of the porch steps, and then silence, the kind that felt alive. Chapter 2. The Letters in the Wooden Box. Morning came soft and gray over Silver River. Mist clung to the trees, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. Evelyn barely slept the night before. Her mind replayed the sound of footsteps on the porch, the silence that followed, the way Rusty had stood guard until dawn, eyes fixed on the door. When the first light crept through the cracked window, she rose, careful not to wake Noah, and opened the front door. The porch was empty. Only footprints remained, faint impressions leading toward the birch grove before vanishing into the fog. Human, but small. Maybe a teenager or a woman. She told herself it was probably nothing. A passing stranger, maybe someone from the nearby town. But deep down she felt something else, the strange pull of a mystery that had waited for her arrival. Inside, Rusty sniffed the air and let out a low whine, tail still but ears alert. "It's all right, boy," she whispered, though her own heart didn't quite believe it. Later that morning, while searching the upper floor for candles, Evelyn found the narrow stairs leading to the attic. The air grew colder as she climbed, her hand brushing cobwebs from the railing. Rusty followed close behind, his paws clicking softly on the wood. The attic smelled of cedar and dust. Boxes were stacked in uneven piles, old blankets draped over forgotten furniture. Light filtered through a broken window, falling across the floor in pale ribbons. Rusty began pawing at a spot near the far wall, his nails scraping against the wood. "What is it?" Evelyn crouched beside him. Beneath a loose floorboard, she found a small compartment, hidden but deliberate. Inside was a wooden box about the size of a shoebox, carved with initials she barely recognized. J.B. Her father's name was James Brooks, the man she'd never met. The box was locked, the brass clasp dark with age. She turned it in her hands, heart pounding. It felt heavier than its size should allow. Rusty pressed his nose against it, then looked up at her expectantly, tail flicking once. "You clever boy," she said softly. Before she could search for a key, a voice called from outside. "Hello there! Anybody home?" Evelyn froze, then went to the window. A man stood near the porch, holding a toolbox. He was in his early 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered beak and lines etched deep around his eyes, the kind that came from sun and sorrow. His hair was iron gray, cut short, and a neatly kept beard framed his jaw. He wore a flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms scarred from years of manual work. When he smiled, it was the kind of smile that came slowly, like he wasn't used to doing it often. Evelyn stepped outside, wary. "Can I help you?" she asked. He tipped his head politely. "Name's Henry Collins. I live down the road, about half a mile that way." He pointed past the birch grove. "Saw the smoke from your chimney last night. Figured someone finally moved into the old Brooks place." His voice was calm, deep, the tone of a man used to solitude. Rusty trotted forward, sniffing him carefully. Henry didn't flinch. He crouched, extending a calloused hand. "Good boy," he murmured, letting Rusty sniff before scratching behind his ear. Rusty's tail wagged once, a silent approval. Evelyn relaxed a little. "We just got here yesterday. I'm Evelyn Brooks." Henry's brows lifted. "Brooks, huh? Then I suppose this was your father's place." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe pity. James was a good man, though life didn't treat him kindly. Evelyn hesitated. "You knew him?" Henry nodded. "Worked with him at the old sawmill years back. Before the war took most things away." His voice dimmed at that, as if those words carried ghosts. "He used to talk about this house. said one day someone would come back for it. Inside, Henry helped fix a leaking roof beam. His movements were steady, practiced, every gesture careful and quiet. Noah watched him curiously from the corner, while Rusty sat beside the fireplace, eyes following both of them. Henry noticed the box on the table. "That looks familiar," he said, wiping his hands. "Your father kept that close, said it held something worth waiting for." Evelyn studied the lock again, frustration tugging at her. "It's sealed shut. I don't have the key." Henry gave a small nod. "If I know James, he hid it somewhere obvious. He believed in leaving trails for those who cared to look." That night, as the firelight flickered, Evelyn turned the box over in her lap. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the brass clasp. Noah had gone to bed, Rusty curled at his feet, dreaming soft canine dreams. The house was quiet except for the sighing of the wind. She thought of Henry, of the way his eyes softened when he spoke of her father, the quiet strength in his hands. There was something grounding about him, a steadiness that reminded her of the life she'd lost and might one day rebuild. When she stood to put the box away, her hand brushed against a small drawer built into the underside of the kitchen table. It slid open with a faint creak. Inside, wrapped in faded velvet, lay a single brass key, the same ornate design as the clasp on the box. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She turned the key, and the lock clicked open with a sound that felt almost alive. Inside were letters, dozens of them, bound by a ribbon once blue but now gray with dust. The first one was addressed to my daughter, Evelyn. She sat down slowly, heart trembling. Rusty lifted his head, ears pricking at the change in her breathing. She unfolded the first page. "If you are reading this," it began, "then I did not have the courage to find you in life. I left behind a home unfinished, not because I stopped building, but because I could not forgive myself enough to complete it." Her eyes blurred. The words swam before her. Beneath the grief in those lines was something deeper, repentance. She turned another page and another, unable to stop. Outside, the wind rose again, brushing against the window panes like a whisper. Rusty's ears flicked toward the door. A shadow passed across the porch, faint but deliberate, as though someone was standing there, listening. And then came the soft sound of a hand on wood. A knock. Chapter 3. The Storm and the Secret Beneath the Floor. The wind began to rise before sundown, carrying with it the scent of wet leaves and the metallic tang of rain. The air grew tense, charged, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Evelyn stood on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself, watching clouds roll over the valley like a tide of smoke. Henry had left just an hour earlier, promising to bring nails and tar for the roof in the morning. "Storm's coming fast," he had warned, his gray eyes narrowing at the dark horizon. "Keep the fire low and stay inside." Now, as the first drops began to fall, his warning echoed in her mind. Noah sat near the hearth, reading one of her father's letters aloud in his soft, boyish voice. Rusty lay by his feet, half asleep, but with one ear always alert. Evelyn tried to listen, but her thoughts kept drifting to the locked lines at the bottom of one of the letters. "The river remembers what we bury." By nightfall, the storm broke in full. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 fists. The wind howled through the trees, bending the birches until they creaked and moaned. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in white-blue bursts. Evelyn moved quickly, checking windows, stuffing old rags under the cracks to stop the drafts. Noah followed her with a candle, his face pale in the flickering light. Rusty barked once, sharp, urgent, and sprinted toward the back door. "Rusty, stay!" Evelyn shouted, but the dog was already clawing at the wood, growling deep in his chest. Then came the sound of splintering. The roof beam above the kitchen groaned, then cracked. "Mom!" Noah cried as the beam gave way. Evelyn turned just in time to see it falling toward them. Rusty lunged, slamming into Noah's side, knocking him out of the way. The beam crashed down, shattering a chair and sending dust into the air. When the noise settled, the rain was louder than before. Noah coughed, rubbing his elbow, his eyes wide. "I'm okay," he whispered, shaken. Rusty stood beside him, tail low, panting, his fur damp and speckled with dust. Evelyn's hands trembled as she checked her son for injuries, then wrapped her arms around both of them. For a long time, they just sat there, the house creaking around them, the storm roaring outside. By morning, the world had turned still and pale. Branches littered the yard, and the roof had caved slightly above the kitchen. Henry arrived shortly after sunrise, his truck grinding up the dirt path. He stepped out, soaked from rain, a toolbox in hand. "You all right?" he asked, voice rough with worry. Evelyn nodded, though her eyes told the truth. She hadn't stopped shaking. Henry glanced at Rusty, then at Noah's bandaged arm. "You've got a brave dog," he said softly. Rusty wagged his tail once, leaning against Evelyn's leg as if to assure her it was nothing. They worked together to clear the debris. Henry's movements were steady and efficient, though every so often he would wince slightly, as if an old injury bothered him, perhaps from years of carpentry or something older, something that belonged to another life. Evelyn didn't ask, but she noticed. When they lifted the broken planks near the hearth, Henry paused. "There's space under here," he said. The wood sounded hollow. Evelyn knelt beside him. Together they pried up the floorboards, revealing a small trapdoor made of oak, its hinges rusted but intact. Rusty sniffed the edges and barked once, tail wagging eagerly. They opened it. Beneath lay a narrow chamber, lined with old stone. The air that rose from it was cool, earthy, untouched by time. Inside were bundles of yellowed papers, wrapped carefully in oilcloth. Evelyn lifted the top layer, revealing sketches, blueprints of a house, hand-drawn with precise, loving detail. Across the top, in faded ink, were the words, "Silver River Home." She traced the lines of the drawings, the beams, the windows, the wide porch facing the water. It was her father's handwriting. "He was building something," she murmured, "something he never finished." Beneath the sketches was a folded piece of parchment. When she opened it, she found a map, the river curving like a ribbon, marked with a small red X at a place labeled the Silver Bend. In the corner, a note read, "For the one who comes home." Evelyn's breath caught. Henry looked over her shoulder, his voice low. "The Silver Bend's about a mile downriver. Hard to reach this time of year, but not impossible." Noah's eyes brightened. "Can we go there, Mom? Maybe he left more letters." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded slowly. Something inside her said the answer waited there. That night, when the moon rose full and pale, they followed the riverbank. The path was slick with mud, the air still heavy with the ghost of rain. Rusty led the way, his nose close to the ground, moving with purpose. The river shimmered in the moonlight, quiet now, but swollen from the storm. When they reached the bend, Rusty stopped, pawing at the earth near the roots of an old willow. Evelyn knelt and began to dig. Her fingers struck something hard, metal. Together they unearthed a small box, rusted but sealed tight. Henry pried it open with his pocket knife. Inside lay a pair of wedding rings, a faded photograph of a young couple beside the river, and a single folded note. Evelyn unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was shaky, the ink blurred from years of moisture. "A home is not a place," it read. "It is the people who keep building, even when the storms come." For a long moment, none of them spoke. The river whispered nearby, a sound like breath. Henry touched the edge of the photograph. "He wanted you to find this," he said quietly. Evelyn felt the tears before she realized she was crying. The moonlight glinted on the rings in her palm. Behind them, Rusty lifted his head, suddenly, and barked, once sharp and low, toward the dark line of trees across the water. Evelyn turned, heart quickening. A shadow moved there, slow and deliberate, watching. Chapter 4. The Ones Who Stayed. The days after the discovery by the river moved like ripples spreading across still water, slow at first, then gathering force. News of Evelyn's arrival and her claim to the Old Brooks property had begun to drift through the nearby town like smoke through trees. Henry heard it first from the man at the hardware store, a thin fellow with a crooked cap and an eagerness for gossip. "They're planning to build a dam up by Silver River," the man said, leaning on the counter. "Big project, government-backed. That bend near the old Brooks place, it'll all be under water by spring." When Henry returned to the cabin that afternoon, his jaw was tight, his eyes shadowed with worry. Evelyn was sitting on the porch, mending one of Noah's jackets, Rusty asleep beside her, his tail flicking in small, steady movements. "They're building a dam," Henry said simply. The words dropped like stones. Evelyn looked up, the color draining from her face. The next morning, 2 officials came by. They arrived in a spotless black SUV, the kind that didn't belong on muddy country roads. The first was Mr. Calvin Reese, a man in his 40s, clean-shaven, hair slicked back with precision, his suit dark enough to swallow the light. His companion, Ms. Laura Finch, was younger, early 30s, with sharp features softened only by her pale blue eyes. She wore a tan trench coat and held a clipboard like a shield. Their politeness was practiced, their smiles too exact. "Mrs. Brooks," Reese began, his tone smooth, "we represent the County Development Office. The state is planning a hydroelectric dam that will provide energy to over 3 towns. Unfortunately, your property sits right in the projected flood zone." Evelyn stood silent, the breeze lifting strands of her hair. "We'd like to offer you a generous compensation package," Finch added quickly, "enough to start fresh anywhere you choose." Henry, who stood near the porch steps, crossed his arms. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with restrained anger. "You mean drown the river, drown this land," he said evenly. Reese ignored him, continuing his pitch about progress and opportunity. Evelyn listened, her heart torn between fear and disbelief. Money could solve so much. New clothes for Noah, real security, no more counting bills by candlelight. Yet every glance toward the water reminded her of the buried box, her father's words, the truth that lived in the soil. When Reese finally handed her the folder with the offer, she took it without answering. That evening, the sky turned copper at sunset. Noah skipped stones by the riverbank while Rusty chased the splashes. Evelyn sat nearby, the folder unopened beside her. Henry joined her quietly, lowering himself onto the grass. The scars on his hands caught the light, long, pale lines that ran across his knuckles. "You fought for something once, didn't you?" she asked. Softly, he hesitated. "Yeah, a long time ago. The army taught me to build and break in equal measure. I came back and realized I was better at the first." He gave a dry smile. "Maybe that's why I fix roofs now, instead of breaking anything else." There was a stillness between them, the kind that wasn't empty but full of something unspoken. Days passed. Meetings were held in town. Letters arrived urging her to reconsider. Reese returned twice, each visit more impatient than the last. "You're standing in the way of progress," he told her, his polite mask slipping. "This project will happen with or without you." Evelyn's answer was simple. "Then it'll have to happen without me." That night, a storm rolled in again. Not as fierce as the one before, but relentless enough to make the river swell. Henry stayed behind to help reinforce the lower beams near the waterline. "If the river rises, it'll hit the foundation first," he warned, hammering nails into the planks. Rusty paced nearby, uneasy, his ears twitching at something in the distance. Suddenly, the earth shuddered beneath their feet. A section of the bank gave way, sending a surge of cold water rushing through the grass. "The dam team must have tested upstream," Henry shouted over the noise. "It's redirecting the flow." Evelyn grabbed a lantern and shouted for Noah to stay inside. Rusty barked, darting toward the tree line. "Rusty!" Evelyn called, but the dog vanished into the darkness, barking insistently as if urging them to follow. Henry and Evelyn ran after him, their boots sinking into the mud. Rusty led them to a narrow glade behind the cabin, and there, hidden between roots and rocks, was a narrow stream gushing clear water into the soil, winding toward the river. "A spring," Henry breathed. "A natural channel." Evelyn knelt, cupping the water in her hands. "It's clean," she said. "It feeds into the river, keeps it alive." Rusty barked again, circling them, tail high. In that moment, Evelyn realized what the dog had found. Proof. Proof that the land wasn't dead space but part of a living ecosystem. "If we show this to the county, they can't flood it," she said, eyes bright. Henry nodded, but before he could reply, another section of ground cracked. The sudden rush of water knocked him backward. Evelyn screamed, grabbing his arm, but the current dragged him toward the fallen logs. Rusty lunged, teeth catching Henry's jacket, pulling with all his strength. Evelyn threw herself into the mud, clutching Henry's other hand. The three of them struggled, woman, man, and dog, until finally, with one last heave, they tumbled onto the bank, soaked and gasping. Henry coughed hard, blood streaking his lip. "You stubborn woman," he rasped with a grin. Evelyn pressed her forehead to his shoulder, laughing and crying all at once. Rusty barked once, then lay beside them, his fur plastered with mud, tail thumping weakly against the ground. 2 days later, Evelyn presented evidence of the underground spring to the county's environmental board, with Henry at her side and Rusty resting at her feet. The officials couldn't deny it. The hydrology maps were wrong. Silver River's Bend was a protected water source. The dam project was suspended. When they returned home that evening, the air smelled of rain and pine, but the storm had finally passed. Henry's arm was bandaged, his steps slower, but his smile, that quiet, hesitant smile, lingered when Evelyn looked his way. She felt it then, something steady and enduring blooming where fear used to live. Rusty limped onto the porch, lay down, and sighed deeply, eyes half closed. Evelyn reached to stroke his muddy fur. "We're all still standing?" she whispered. Henry met her gaze, his voice rough but certain. "The ones who stay," he said, "are the ones who build." And somewhere beyond the trees, the river answered with its calm, unending song. Chapter 5. The Last Light on Silver River. The morning light came softly over the valley, spreading like honey over the quiet water. 1 year had passed since the storm, since the fight for the land, since the night Evelyn realized that some people were meant not to pass through your life, but to stay. The house stood proudly now, rebuilt with steady hands and shared laughter. It was not perfect. The roof leaned slightly, the porch creaked when the wind blew, but it was alive. Smoke curled from the chimney like a living breath. The scent of wood and cinnamon filled the air. Evelyn had been baking since dawn. Inside, the kitchen glowed warm against the pale morning. Evelyn Brooks, now 50, looked stronger than she ever had. The lines on her face had softened, not from time, but from peace. Her auburn hair, streaked silver, was tied loosely behind her neck, and flour dusted her hands. She wore an apron patched from scraps of fabric she'd saved from her sewing shop, the small store she opened in town after the dam project was canceled. People came from nearby villages to buy her pies, her hand-stitched quilts, her laughter. She had become a quiet cornerstone of Silver River. Outside, Noah worked beside Henry near the riverbank. The boy had grown taller, his shoulders broader, his voice deeper but still gentle. He was sanding a plank of wood while Henry showed him how to fit it into place. "Keep your hands steady," Henry said, his voice calm and patient. His hair had grown grayer over the year, and the faint scar on his temple, from the night of the storm, caught the sunlight. He was still strong, but there was a new stillness in him, a contentment that had once seemed impossible. Rusty lay on the grass nearby, muzzle now fully silver, tail sweeping slow, rhythmic arcs as he watched them. Henry glanced toward the house. "Your mother's baking again," he said with a smile. Noah grinned. "She says it helps her think." Henry chuckled. "About what?" Noah shrugged. "Maybe about Dad. Or maybe about you." Henry pretended not to hear that last part, though a faint color touched his cheeks. As the day unfolded, neighbors began to arrive, families carrying baskets, children chasing each other down the dirt road. It was the town's autumn festival, the first one held since the flood that almost changed everything. There was music, laughter, the smell of roasted apples and spiced bread. Evelyn's stall stood near the river, decorated with hand-woven ribbons. She sold pies and coffee, her smile as warm as the hearthlight that had become her signature. Among the crowd was Margaret Hensley, a woman in her late 60s, with a kind face and silver curls, known for running the town's post office. She had a habit of speaking her mind, her voice brisk but never cruel. She leaned across Evelyn's table and said, "You've done more for this town than the mayor ever did. This river's alive because of you." Evelyn laughed, embarrassed, brushing hair from her cheek. "I just didn't want to see it die." Margaret winked. "Well, sometimes saving a place saves the people, too." As evening came, lanterns were lit along the water, floating orbs of light drifting gently downstream. Henry stood by the dock with Noah, helping him push the small wooden boat they had built together into the current. "She floats," Noah said proudly. "She does," Henry agreed, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You built something that lasts." Later, when the crowd gathered near the bonfire, Henry disappeared for a moment. Evelyn was talking with Margaret when she heard Noah's voice calling, "Mom, come to the river." She followed him down the gentle slope, where the moon shimmered over the water like liquid glass. Henry was waiting there, dressed in a clean flannel shirt, his hair combed back. His hands, rough and scarred, were clasped together as if steadying his heart. Evelyn stopped a few steps away, her breath catching. "Henry, what are you—" But he was already kneeling on one knee, the river's reflection trembling around him. In his hand was a small velvet box, the same one they had found under the silver bend. Inside, resting against the faded fabric, was her father's wedding ring. The metal had been cleaned and polished, glinting softly in the lantern light. Henry looked up at her, eyes bright beneath the twilight. "Evelyn Brooks," he said, voice low but sure. "I've built many things in my life. Homes, boats, bridges, but never a place that felt like mine until now. This house, this river, you and Noah, you're what home means to me. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay, for all the days that remain." The silence that followed was filled with the sound of the river, the laughter of distant children, and Rusty's soft bark as if he too understood. Evelyn covered her mouth, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. "Oh, Henry," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. She took the ring, holding it against her heart. "You already stayed," she said. "You've been home all along." The crowd by the fire began to clap and cheer as Noah whooped and hugged Rusty, who barked proudly, tail wagging like a flag. Lanterns drifted downstream, carrying their light toward the bend, toward the memory of everything that had come before. Later, after the festival ended and the last guests had gone, Evelyn and Henry sat together on the porch. The air was cool, the stars bright. Rusty lay curled at their feet, breathing slow and steady. Noah slept inside, his window open to the whispering of the river. Evelyn leaned her head against Henry's shoulder. "It's strange," she murmured, "how a place once filled with ghosts can become full of life again." Henry squeezed her hand. "Because you stayed long enough to listen." As the moon rose high, a soft wind rustled the birch leaves. Rusty opened his eyes briefly, gazing toward the water, then let them drift shut once more. The river shimmered like glass, carrying light and memory alike, endless and kind. Sometimes, God doesn't send us miracles wrapped in light. He sends them quietly, in the shape of an old cabin, a loyal dog, or the courage to love again after loss. Evelyn didn't find gold in Silver River. She found grace. Because every piece of wood she lifted, every tear she shed, became part of something sacred, a home rebuilt not by hands alone, but by faith. And maybe that's what God does for us every day. He lets us lose what's easy so we can discover what's eternal. He reminds us that even broken hearts can become holy places if we choose to love again. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope tonight. Leave a comment. Tell us what you believe God's greatest miracle in your life has been. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep sharing stories of love, redemption, and the quiet ways God still moves among us. May His light guide your path, and may your home, no matter how small, always be filled with His grace.